"You can't leave." The clerk's whisper was louder than a scream. I stood at the federal building counter, gripping $24 and an eviction notice, waiting for a passport stamp so I could take a janitor job. Instead, the screen between us flashed a violent, pulsing red. A silent alarm strobe began to spin on the wall. Two armed guards stepped forward, hands on their holsters. "Ma'am," the clerk said, her hands shaking. "This social security number belongs to a child who died in 1991. My world tilted. Dead. I was standing right here. But before I could argue, the elevator doors slid open. A man in a sharp black suit stepped out. He stopped 2 feet away and said 3 words that erased my entire existence. "Welcome back, Abigail Hayes." Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who is part of our community. Abigail Hayes. The name didn't taste like sugar or a long-lost dream. It tasted like blood and old money. I followed Jonathan into a quiet, soundproofed office that smelled like expensive coffee and cold, hard reality. He didn't read me my rights, and I didn't ask for them. I sat in a mahogany chair that cost more than my last 3 basement apartments combined, and I didn't shake, I didn't cry. I looked at the glass of ice water he set down, and I saw a reflection. I no longer recognized a woman who had spent 14 years believing she was a glitch in the universe, a mistake named Mara. Jonathan slid a file across the desk. He didn't offer a hug or a platitude about how hard my life must have been. He just flipped it open. Inside was a digital rendering, an age progression photo of a young woman. She had my eyes, my jawline, and my exact nose, but her skin hadn't been thinned by the stress of choosing between electricity and bread. She looked loved. That was the version of me that hadn't been stolen from a park in 1991. I stared at her, and I realized my life hadn't been a tragedy. It had been a heist. Justin, the man I called my stepfather, wasn't a parent. He was a manager of stolen property. He had kept me in the laundry room and the wine cellar just to keep the truth from breathing. Every time he called me a burden, every time he made me sleep on a cot while Jessica got the master suite, he was just performing a market devaluation of my soul. He needed me broken so I would never look at my own birth certificate. He needed me desperate so I would never realize I was the rightful owner of the house he was living in. I looked up at Jonathan. My anger wasn't loud. It was clinical. I didn't ask about my real parents' faces or where they were landing. I asked about the Hayes Trust Fund. In the world Justin raised me in, money was the only language that commanded a response. I'd been the silent investor in their version of a family, footing the bill with my own suffering while they lived on my inheritance. It was time for a forced audit. I pushed the glass of water aside. I told Jonathan to freeze every account associated with the Hayes name immediately. I didn't want a reunion until I had stripped away everything Justin thought he owned. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for 30 years. Now, I was calling in the debt. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. The soundproof glass of the office couldn't block the echoes in my head. For 14 years, I lived in a house that felt like a sanctuary to the world, but was a processing plant for my spirit. I remembered the smell of the wine cellar in the Hamptons' damp earth and the expensive fermentation of things that were allowed to age with dignity. I was the only thing in that house not allowed to have value. While Jessica was being fitted for silk gowns and sent to finishing schools, I was in the laundry room, scrubbing the stains of their excess. Justin, the Honorable Judge Justin, had a specific way of looking at me, not with hate, but with the cold calculation a man has for a tool that hasn't broken yet. "You're a mistake, Mara," he would say, his voice as smooth as the gavel he used to ruin lives. "You're a burden the universe dropped on my doorstep, and every meal I give you is a debt you'll never repay." I believed him. I didn't just accept the cot in the basement. I thanked him for it. I polished his shoes and Jessica's silver while they discussed their summer plans in the garden, a ghost hovering at the edges of their perfect portrait. This was the trap, a house that was actually a prison without bars. It's what psychologists call learned helplessness. When you are told you are worthless for long enough, you stop looking for the exit because you've been convinced you don't deserve the world outside. I was a survivor who had been trained to be grateful for my own cage. Every kind word Justin threw me was like a crumb to a starving dog, and I ate it up, unaware that he was just using those crumbs to keep me from asking why I didn't look like anyone in his family photos. But there was a darker ledger Justin kept, one that went beyond unpaid labor. I remembered the 3 procedures at that private clinic, the ones he told me were for my own weak health. He said I needed bone marrow transplants and spinal taps because I was fragile. In reality, he was harvesting me to keep Jessica alive. He wasn't keeping a stepdaughter, he was maintaining a biological warehouse. I was the backup parts for his golden child. My blood, my bone, my very essence was the insurance policy for their happiness. The realization didn't make me scream. It made me cold. It was the same coldness that must have been in Justin's heart when he realized he could kidnap a child and turn her into a medicine cabinet. Standing in that federal office now, looking at my real face for the first time, I realized I never owed them a cent. They had been drafting off my life force for 30 years. The debt didn't belong to me. I was the creditor, and I was here to collect the interest in full. The burden was finally putting her weight down, and I knew it would be enough to crack the foundation of everything he built on my bones. The door didn't just open, it exploded inward with the weight of stolen authority. I didn't flinch. I watched as 2 uniformed deputies stormed the room, hands on their weapons, their boots marking the polished floor of the federal building. And then came Justin. He wasn't wearing the relaxed, expensive linen of the Hamptons. He was in his full judicial dress uniform, the star of his office gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He didn't look at Jonathan. He looked straight at me, with eyes that were dead to everything but his own survival. "Step away from the suspect," he barked. His voice had the same practiced resonance he used in his courtroom to silence the innocent. Jonathan stood his ground, moving between me and the deputies. "This is a federal investigation, Judge. You have no jurisdiction here." Justin didn't even blink. He slapped a folded paper onto the mahogany desk. "I have a warrant, signed by a county judge 10 minutes ago," he said. "Grand larceny, felony charges." He pointed a finger at me, the same finger that had poked my chest 1,000 times while he called me a mistake. "That woman stole $100,000 worth of diamond jewelry from my wife's bedroom before she fled this morning. I'm taking her into custody." It was a lie, of course. A desperate, tactical move to pull me back into the shadows of his jurisdiction, where he could bury the truth. I hadn't been to his house in 3 years. "Save it for the judge," Justin hissed. He nodded to his men. "Cuff her." One of the deputies grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back until my shoulder joint popped. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a cry. The pain was just another line item on the balance sheet. I saw the calculation in Jonathan's eyes. He knew the law. He knew that a local felony warrant could technically pull me out of a federal building if they claimed I was a flight risk. Justin was weaponizing the bureaucracy he'd spent 30 years mastering. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my skin. The click sounded like a gunshot. Justin grabbed my bicep, his grip bruising. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear, a whisper meant only for me. "I told you never to dig," he hissed. "I told you to leave it alone. Now you're going to die in a holding cell, Mara. You'll hang yourself with a bedsheet before your rich parents even touch the tarmac." He wasn't taking me to jail to book me. He was taking me to jail to execute me. Outside the office, I could see Jessica on her phone, her thumbs flying as she uploaded a post to her thousands of followers. I caught a glimpse of the screen. The girl we rescued robbed us, heartbroken. Some people can't be saved. Justin jerked me toward the door. "Move," he shouted. He thought he was dragging a scared little girl back to her cage. He thought he was handling a burden. But the woman he was marching toward the elevator was a witness who had finally stopped playing along. He was so focused on his own power that he didn't realize he was marching straight into a timestamp he couldn't rewrite. Check the timestamp. My scream tore through the lobby of the Federal Plaza, echoing off the cold marble walls like a gunshot. It wasn't a plea for help. It was an order. The deputies dragging me toward the elevators hesitated, their boots skidding on the polished floor. For a split second, I saw the flicker of confusion on their faces, and that was the opening I needed. I didn't try to pull away from their grip. I stopped fighting and instead went completely limp, dropping my entire body weight to the floor. Dead weight is impossible to move gracefully, a trick I'd learned during years of moving heavy furniture while the rest of the family watched. Justin snarled, yanking on my bruised arm. "Get up," he barked, his face a mask of purple rage. "Stop making a scene." I didn't get up. I planted my heels and slowly straightened my spine, pulling against the handcuffs until the steel bit deep into my wrists. I turned my head and looked directly into his dead eyes. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't flinch. I let him see exactly what he had created. The victim was gone, and the witness was finally awake. "The warrant," I yelled, my voice cracking but loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. "Check the time he signed it." Justin kicked my leg, a desperate attempt to silence the truth. "Shut her up," he roared at his deputies. "Get her in the elevator." But it was too late. Jonathan was already running toward us, his hand reaching for the radio on his shoulder. He threw his body weight against the elevator doors just as they were sliding shut, forcing them back open with a screech of metal that sounded like a verdict. Two uniformed Federal Protective Service officers materialized from the security checkpoint, their hands on their weapons as they blocked the path. "Hold it," Jonathan barked, his voice no longer the soothing tone from the office. This was the voice of a man who commanded federal task forces. "Nobody moves. This is obstruction of justice," Justin roared, sweat beading on his forehead as he clutched the warrant to his chest. "I am a judge executing a lawful arrest." "Let me see the warrant," Jonathan demanded, holding out his hand. He didn't ask. He waited. Realizing he was staring down 3 federal weapons, Justin shoved the crumpled paper at Jonathan. "Read it and weep, agent," he sneered. "Grand larceny, signed by Judge Miller at 8 o'clock sharp this morning." Jonathan scanned the paper, then looked up at the digital clock above the security desk. Then he looked at the monitors behind the guard station. "You're sloppy, Justin," Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. He turned the paper around so the deputies could see it. "This warrant was signed at 8 o'clock sharp for a crime that supposedly happened at the Hayes mansion in the Hamptons." He pointed a finger at the security monitor on the wall. "But my building's cameras logged Abigail entering through the north metal detectors at 7:45 a.m. The lobby went dead silent. "Unless she can teleport," Jonathan said, stepping closer to Justin, "she couldn't have stolen $100,000 worth of jewelry from your house at 8 o'clock if she was standing in my lobby 15 minutes earlier." The deputies holding me loosened their grip as if my skin had turned to fire. They looked at each other, then at Justin, realizing they weren't executing an arrest. They were accomplices to a kidnapping in progress. "It's a typo," Justin shouted, spit flying from his mouth as his authority dissolved into a mask of purple rage. Jonathan didn't move. He stood there with a cold contempt that made the judicial uniform look like a cheap costume. "You lied on a sworn affidavit to get this signed," Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "That's perjury. You tried to drag a federal witness out of here on falsified charges. That's kidnapping. Release her," he ordered the deputies. The deputies let go of my arms like I was made of lightning. I scrambled backward across the floor, putting the entire marble lobby between me and the man who had stolen my life. Justin was cornered. He didn't draw his service pistol. He knew that would get him killed instantly, but he ripped his taser from its holster and leveled it at Jonathan. He was insane, holding a federal agent at gunpoint in a federal building. But I looked at his eyes, wide and frantic, and I realized he wasn't trying to arrest me anymore. He was just trying to survive the next 5 minutes. The madness drained when 3 federal weapons snapped up, trained on his chest. "Drop the weapon," Jonathan ordered. Justin tossed the taser to the marble floor and raised his hands. He sneered, a final, ugly smile crossing his face. "Fine, you caught me. The warrant was fake. I knew about the kidnapping. I helped cover it up. I kept you. I hid you. I stole your life." He laughed, a sound like dry bones rattling. "But check the calendar. The kidnapping happened in 1991. The statute of limitations expired in 2011. You can't touch me for kidnapping or fraud. I walk, and legally, you're still incompetent. I control your assets. He turned for the door, already preparing to sue us all. Jonathan didn't move. He stopped him mid-step with a thick file. You're right about the statute for the kidnapping, but you forgot one rule, the constructive trust doctrine. You don't own property obtained through fraud. You simply hold it for the victim. The file hit a bench with a thud. We traced the ransom payments, the foster stipends, and the investments you made with the Hayes estate funds. Civil fraud doesn't expire when the victim was a minor. Your assets are frozen. Your house is seized. Your accounts belong to the victim. As Justin recoiled in terror, I realized his power had been a hollow shell. This is the illusion of the empty wallet, the reality that a bully's authority is often just a facade rented with stolen money. When financial resources are cut off, the stature vanishes because there was never any internal value or character to begin with. He wasn't a judge anymore. He was just a shell of a man whose wallet was wrung and his soul even emptier. Jonathan pointed at me. It all belongs to Abigail. Justin screamed as the handcuffs finally snapped shut for real. You're nothing, I whispered as the heavy doors of the federal building closed behind Justin. The marble lobby was quiet now, the echoes of his screams for his assets still vibrating in the cold air. Justin, the man who had sat on the highest bench in the state, was now kneeling on the floor. He wasn't begging for forgiveness. He was begging for the title to the Hamptons mansion. He was clenching his judicial robes as if the fabric could still provide him with the protection of a law he had spent 30 years breaking. I didn't look away, and I didn't feel a flicker of pity. I looked down at him from the top of the marble stairs, clutching the file Jonathan had given me. It contained the frozen account numbers, the seized deeds, and the ironclad proof of his fraud. You taught me that family isn't blood, I said, my voice cutting through his frantic pleas. Now I'm going to teach you that justice isn't a status. You never owned that house, Justin. You were just an incompetent property manager for an estate that belonged to me. He looked up at me, his face a map of ancient greed and new terror. Abigail, please, he stammered. I kept you alive. I gave you a name. I tightened my grip on the file. You kept a witness in a laundry room, I corrected him. And the name you gave me was a cage. I'm not Mara the Burden anymore. I am Abigail Hayes, and you are just a bad servant being fired. The guards moved in to pull him to his feet. Behind him, Jessica was being escorted out by a different team, her designer phone confiscated, her social media influence silenced by the weight of a felony investigation. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were only shocked that I had stopped playing my role in their theater of cruelty. Jonathan walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. It's over, Abigail, he said. He's going to a place where his gavel won't mean anything. I looked at my bruised wrists, where the handcuffs had been just minutes before. The marks were still there, but the weight was gone. I felt a strange, cold clarity settling over me. This wasn't a breakdown or a moment of triumph. It was a balance sheet finally being reconciled. I watched the police cruiser pull away, taking the man I had called father toward a cell he had helped build for others. I didn't wait for him to disappear. I turned toward the elevators. I had 3 decades of a life to reclaim, and I wasn't going to spend another second watching the wreckage of his. I didn't keep the Hamptons mansion. I sold it, along with 70% of the Manhattan real estate empire Justin had painstakingly built on the back of my stolen life. I wasn't liquidating assets out of a need for more cash. This wasn't about greed. It was about reallocating resources to where they actually belonged. I used every cent to establish the Hayes Foundation for Children. It is a legal and emotional fortress for kids whose identities have been weaponized or stolen by the systems meant to protect them. This is what I call the justice of the seed sower. You see, most people get stuck in the justice of punishment. They want to see the jail cell, the orange jumpsuit, and the misery of the villain. And while Justin got all of that, I realized that punishment only looks at the past. Sowing looks at the future. True justice isn't just about pulling the weeds. It's about what you plant in the empty space they leave behind. By building something that would protect 1,000 versions of myself, I made Justin's 30 years of cruelty entirely meaningless. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting, and I had Kui Kung balance the books. I stood on the roof of the highest building in the Hayes portfolio, watching the sunset bleed gold across the New York harbor. The wind was cold, but I didn't feel it. I pulled a small, crumpled piece of paper from my coat pocket, the $24, and the eviction notice I had been clutching when this nightmare ended. I watched as a private helicopter landed on the pad. Two people stepped out, their faces mirrors of my own. I didn't need proof. I felt it in my bones. Abigail, the woman whispered. I didn't answer right away. I struck a match and watched the eviction notice curl into black ash, letting the wind take it over the Hudson River. Mara, the mistake was incinerated. The burden was finally lifted. I walked toward my parents, leaving the ashes behind. I had nothing left of my old life, but I was finally free. If you believe that justice belongs to those who are resilient enough to plant seeds in the ashes of their past, please share this video. Let's connect with those who are still looking for their light. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another journey of truth and retribution. Stay strong and find your own way home.